Notre Dame fans, welcome to a special edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is early here on Wednesday morning, at least early for me. It's about 9:30 on Wednesday morning, and we're going to talk a little bit of recruiting. We haven't talked recruiting in a while here at Irish Breakdown, but today we're going to talk some recruiting because Notre Dame has picked up a big 2023 commitment by the name of Sedrick Irvin Jr. Now, if that name sounds familiar to some of you Notre Dame fans who are my age, around my age, or older, that is because he is the son of former Michigan State running back Cedric Irvin Sr., who played against Notre Dame in 1997 and 1998, both Michigan State wins, and he went over 100 yards both times. So obviously comes from a great lineage, but Notre Dame has picked up 2023 running back Sedrick Irvin Jr. Cedric plays at Gulliver Prep in Miami. Very, very, very good academic school. And if you listen to his announcement today, obviously academics were a big part of this. From what I was told, this actually, his Final Four was Notre Dame, Oregon, Stanford, and Michigan State. Obviously, Michigan State felt that they had a shot because his dad played there. What I was told, this was essentially going to come down to Notre Dame or Stanford. This is a young man that was looking to go to an academic school. So big pickup for Notre Dame. And we're going to talk about his game. We're going to talk about what this means for Notre Dame. We're going to talk about sort of what's next when it comes to running back recruiting. And then hopefully we'll be able to get Brian Smith on here in a little bit and get Brian's thoughts on this. And I want to get Brian's thoughts on just overall what it means for Notre Dame to be able to go into the state of Florida and have the success that they've had in recent seasons, because that's been something that Notre Dame's recruiting strategy in the state of Florida has been a little interesting over the years. It's obviously certainly a priority for Notre Dame when Brian Kelly first got here. Then there went through a stretch where, they let's just say they didn't have a lot of success with some of the kids they got from Florida. Didn't quite pan out, and there were some other issues from the state of Florida. Notre Dame clearly de-emphasized the state of Florida, started putting more emphasis on California and the Mid-Atlantic and the state of Georgia. Now you're seeing Notre Dame going back into Florida, but doing so in a little bit more strategic fashion, and it's really paid off well for Notre Dame. They now have 2 kids committed, so they have 5 commitments in the 2023 class now. Sedrick Irvin Jr. joins tight end Cooper Flanagan as the other offensive commit. He also joins defensive ends Keon Keeley and Brennan Vernon, who are 2 top 100 players. And then, of course, you have Adon Schuler, who is a safety from New Jersey. Now, obviously, as I said, Sedrick Irvin is the second player from Florida. He joins Keon Keeley, who is, I'm telling y'all, he has not even begun to blow up as a recruit. I won't be shocked, in my opinion, if at some point in time Keon Keeley becomes a 5-star. He is that good. Sedrick Irvin is ranked as the number 81 player in the country according to Rivals. He's around 205 according to 247 Sports. I would view him kind of in the middle of those two, but he is the 3rd player in this class already out of 5 to be ranked as a top 100 recruit by at least one recruiting service. Notre Dame is ranked. They have the number 2 recruiting class in the 2023 class right now, which goes with a 2022 class that currently ranks number 1 by Rivals and number 2 by 247 Sports. So recruiting is really rocking and rolling at Notre Dame right now, and it's good to see the offensive staff get on the board a little bit in the 2023 class. Obviously, the first 3 commitments were all defensive players, but the last 2 have been on the offensive side of the ball, Cooper Flanagan being the most recent prior to Sedrick Irvin. So certainly a big commitment for Notre Dame. We're going to dive a little bit into Sedrick Irvin, but I think the best way to really kick this off is like I said, we're going to go over the film. We're going to talk about his game, talk about how he fits at Notre Dame. We're going to get into sort of what's next at the position and all that type of stuff. But I think it's best to start off with just diving into the film, and let's take a look at what Sedrick does. I think you're going to really like what this young man brings to the table. Now, this is going to be sophomore film of Sedrick. Now, the first thing that he's built, for those that remember his dad, he's built a lot like his dad. His dad was short but strong. Sedrick is, again, his sophomore film. If you see some junior clips of him, you're going to see that he's already put on some weight. He's about 185 now. He's very athletic build. He's strong runner, and it's only going to get stronger as he gets older and really fills out. But he's a strong runner. He's a really efficient runner, and you could see it there. He's got really nice feet. I wouldn't call him like a super electric guy, He's a put the foot in the ground and cut kind of guy, as you see right there. Real efficient runner, doesn't waste a lot of movement when he runs. And the thing I like about him is, look, he's a good athlete. He's not an elite athlete. He's got good speed. He doesn't have great speed. But because he's so efficient and he's got such great vision, he's able to play as fast as possible. I want to go back to that run right there. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. He's a really smart runner. Watch him set this block up. So this is a perfect example of setting up a block. He strings it outside, gets that cornerback to widen out, and then he immediately, bam, cuts right inside as soon as his receiver makes that block, gets inside. Look at that second level anticipation. He makes that cut, sees that guy, bam, makes another cut, runs through it. That's really good vision for that young man. And you see that a lot of that. And he doesn't waste a lot of motion. He's a really good football player. And now this is something, too, that we've seen this more in the summer than we have on film. They don't throw to him a ton in high school, but he's got really good hands. He's a kid that I think can play some in the slot. You know, not like Kyron Williams, more of a traditional running back in the slot. Look at those feet. Look at those feet. Look at that move. That jump cut is really impressive. That is, and then the burst right back outside. Look at that balance. That's when you talk about why is it important for a running back to have balance, it's this right here. The ability to make cuts and then immediately get back on track, make another cut, and just accelerate. Guys without great balance, you can make that cut, but then it takes you a couple steps to really get into your running groove. With Cedric, that's not an issue. That's really great footwork there. Really efficient runner, no wasted movement. He doesn't dance just to dance. If he makes cuts with purpose. I really like that about him. Nice blocking by the line there. I have to give the line credit for that one. That's there was nobody. Oops, let's get back to that. Nobody near him on that particular run. That's when running back is easy. Nobody touches you. Really good push. But the thing I like about it is he gets right behind it. He just goes. He just hits that hole and he's going to get what he can get. Very smart football player. Thing is, as a sophomore too, he only got to play 6 games because of obviously COVID shortened season. That's another example of the balance I'm talking about. You can see him making moves there. Let's get back to that. This is, you got people diving at your ankles. You're able to make cuts, bounce it out, get right back on your track. Doesn't waste any motion. That's great balance. Great balance. And again, it's that combined with his vision that allow him to be a really effective running back, despite the fact he doesn't have elite physical tools. He's not elite, doesn't have elite size. He doesn't have great speed. He doesn't have great athleticism. Nothing about him is great from that standpoint. He's just a really smart runner. Reminds me a little bit of Torian Folston coming out of high school. I'd say Sedrick maybe it's a step faster. Torian was a step quicker. Very similar body types, very similar skill set, smart, know how to run, know how to play, great balance. Look at that leg drive. Really like that there. I was going to let these last few clips run out. Just really, look at that. I mean, that's just a smooth, quick cut. Really like this kid as a runner. And if you guys could see what I'm looking at right now, so Vince joined the chat. He's not going to actually be talking today because he's in class, but he's staring at his monitor. So all I see is his forehead, and it's freaking me out a little bit. Unfortunately, Vince won't be in the show with us today because he is in class, but that's what Vince does in class. He watches the show. He watches film. I hope I didn't get him in too much trouble. Here's another screen pass. Again, I'd like to see him. I'd like to see them use him more out of the backfield as a runner. Or excuse me, as a pass catcher. I like that leg drive. I really think he could be effective and that's the thing is I see him at least early in his career. I could see him definitely being a really effective third down weapon because he is short, he's strong. I'll be willing to bet you. A case of Mountain Dew that he's going to be a willing blocker. You know, a kid that'll step in and block. I see him being a really effective third down weapon at the very least early in his career. Here's more screen game, getting him out in space. And look, he catches that ball and he just gets vertical. He's not looking to make moves. He's just going to keep going until he's got to make a move. No wasted motion with this kid. He's been clearly well-schooled, well-taught, knows how to play the game. I'd like to see him get the ball in the outside arm. It looks almost an exclusively right-handed ball carrier, which is perfectly fine when he's running to the right because his stiff arm hand is inside. But I'm a big believer in guys getting the ball in their outside arm, so that way the inside hand is always free to use a stiff arm. So that is sophomore film of Sedrick Irvin Jr. There's no game film yet of him as a junior. There's a couple highlight clips that I've looked at. He seems to have gotten a little bit more of a burst as a junior. And he hits that ground, he hits the hole, and he's got just a little bit more juice coming out of his break from what I've seen so far on film. So really, really talented player. And we did get a super chat to start the show. I do want to pull that up, so I appreciate that very much. Triple Deck Poe says Notre Dame won't lose championships for lack of talent. They are recruiting with the best. Great get. 2023 is off to an amazing start. No question about that. So appreciate the super chat. And your comment is spot on. I mean, look, Notre Dame is going into Florida and getting kids. They're going into Georgia and getting kids. They're getting kids out of Texas a little bit. They're going out to California and beating, USC and Oregon for West Coast kids, especially California kids. So, they're really taking advantage of the on-field success that they've had on the recruiting trail. Now they need to continue winning, and so they can continue to take advantage of that. But this is certainly a big pickup for Notre Dame in getting Cedric Irvin. So let's kind of talk about what the impact of this commitment is for Notre Dame. And we're going to look at it in a couple ways. Number one, let's look at it from a pure running back standpoint. So Notre Dame took two running backs in the 2021 class. Obviously, they took Logan Diggs and Audric Estime. They took one running back in the 2022 class so far, Jadarian Price, who's off to a great senior season, by the way. If you have not had a chance to watch Jadarian Price's senior season film so far, you need to do so. He is off to a great start so far. And then there was kind of a conversation of, okay, so what do you do next? You need another back. So do you bring a second back in 2022? Do you bring in a second back in 2023? Do you do a little bit of both? I don't know if Notre Dame is going to have the room to bring in 2 in 22 and 2 in 23. Some of that's going to depend on, NCAA maybe changes some rules here in the next couple of years to expand scholarships a little bit. But right now, if we're working off of the 85, I don't know if they can do that. What I think this does is now you've got Cedric Irvin in this class. I think it gives you a decision. Okay, do we want to go after Quinshawn Judkins? Do we want to have to go after another 2022 back, or do we focus on the 2023 class? And I think depending on how the roster shakes out, maybe you could end up doing both. But I think what I would do right now is, if I'm Notre Dame, is getting Cedric Irvin. It gives you, okay, we've got it back in 2023. It allows you to really zero in on that next back. Okay, so you've got your dual threat back. You've got the guy that can run between the tackles, can get outside, a guy that can catch the football. You've kind of got your dual threat back. Now you look at the running back class and you say, okay, well, what's next is now you focus on that big time back. Now you focus on that really stud complementary player to him and see if you can get him. And so what I think this does for Notre Dame in the 2023 class is it allows them to now narrow their focus. And that's important because you can now really start to get a feel for where do you stand with Justin Haynes, right? Where do you stand with Jade Lamar? Where do you stand, with some of these backs that you're going after to say, hey, look, Cedric Baxter is another one that I know for a fact Cedric Baxter likes Notre Dame. He was a former Florida State commit. He was at the Notre Dame-Florida State game. He's a kid that Notre Dame likes a lot, and a kid that has expressed interest to people that I know that have talked to him. He's from the Orlando area about legitimate interest in Notre Dame. So, obviously Notre Dame has also looked at Caden Fegan, who's being recruited as a running back early on, but a guy that's sort of an athlete. So what this allows you to do by getting Cedric Irvin is it allows you to zero in on your top guys. Okay. And then the second part of it is it allows you to kind of maybe have some more serious conversations with kids that you maybe wouldn't have had otherwise because of the fact that you have a back next to, hey, look, we've got to know if you're serious or not. And then what that'll allow them to do is narrow their board even more. And what that means is when you still have a need for two backs, you have to be careful that you don't push too hard because you don't want to have guys go off the board. You have to expand your list. You have to keep finding guys because, you need two guys. Well, now you've got one of those guys. So what it allows you to do is say, okay, well, there's certain guys that are off the board now. Like, all right, we weren't going to take Cedric Irvin and this kid over here. And so you focus now on your top guys. But in doing so, now with Cedric in the class, you can now ask some more pertinent questions to find out if this kid is really serious about you or not. And those two things combined are what should allow Notre Dame to really figure out who really does like them and who doesn't, and allow them to zero in on that second running back in the class. So that from a running back standpoint, that's what I think that means. Here's another thing that I want to talk about. And I don't believe this is why the staff went after Sedrick Irvin Jr. at all. I don't want to take anything away from this young man. They've liked him for a while. And the staff, they offered him in November of 2020. They had been on him for a while. And that's impressive when you consider, they weren't able to get on the road the year before and go see kids, but they've liked Sedrick Irvin Jr. for a while. He is a teammate of Jaylen Brown, who is one of the best football players in the 2023 class. He's a wide receiver, also goes to Gulliver Prep, also a big-time academic kid. Again, if you go to Gulliver Prep, you're not going there just for football. You're going there for football and academics. It's an outstanding prep school. So you've got a teammate of his now. I don't think that hurts. I'm not saying that's why they got Sedrick Irvin Jr. I don't think that's it. I think they got Sedrick Irvin Jr. because they like Sedrick Irvin Jr. But I don't think it hurts that he's also a teammate of a guy that you view as one of the, in my opinion, the best players in the country. So certainly a good pickup for Notre Dame in that regard. I think that this puts them in a – boy, I tell you what, this 2023 class really is getting off to a great start. We've got some comments in here. Anthony Solomon says this 2023 class could be special. And, Anthony, you're not wrong. I mean, it's not just the players they have. I mean, obviously you have Brendan Vernon and Keon Keeley at red defensive end, who both top 100 recruits. You've got Adon Schuler, who's a top 200 recruit at safety. You've got Cooper Flanagan, who's a top 200 recruit at tight end. You've now got Sedrick Irvin, who's a top 200 caliber player at running back. You're off to a very, very good start, but you're going into the backyard of some places where you haven't necessarily had success. You've got a commitment at tight end from a kid from De La Salle. Look, that's just not a school that Notre Dame has had a ton of success with in the past. They just haven't. They haven't had a lot of success at Mater Dei and De La Salle. Well, now you got Isaiah Foskey from De La Salle in the 2019 class. I believe the last guy they got from De La Salle was, I believe, Derek Landry, which tells you how long it had been. They hadn't landed a player from Mater Dei, I believe, since Mike McNair. So it had been a while. Brad Williams, I think, and Mike McNair were the last two guys they got from Mater Dei. So now in a 4-year stretch, you've now got commitments from 3 players from those West Coast powers. Obviously, Cooper Flanagan also being from De La Salle. And then in the 2022 class, you got C.J. Williams from Mater Dei. So I think that's a great sign for Notre Dame. And then you look down in Florida. And look, Florida's an interesting state because there's a lot of kids down there that don't fit the Notre Dame profile. And it can be hard to kind of wade through some of that to find that player. And I understand some of the apprehension that Notre Dame has had because guys they've brought up from Florida have gotten in some trouble and things haven't always worked out. I mean, you look at Dexter Williams got in trouble. Tavon Coney got in some trouble. Kevin Stefferson got in trouble. Aaron Lynch got in trouble. I mean, the Kevin Austin was suspended for a season. There's been a lot of those kids that have had some issues. And so Notre Dame just decided to, okay, we're just going to stop recruiting that state a little bit. And now they're back to it, which is smart. But they're back to it saying, hey, look, there's kids down there that do fit our profile. Some of them are private school kids. Some of them aren't. You know, Joe Wilkins Jr. I mean, that's a Notre Dame kid. There's no question about it. But his profile wouldn't make you think he was a Notre Dame kid based on the stereotypical what makes a Notre Dame kid. But Joe is a Notre Dame kid despite being a public school kid. And then in this class, or last year's class, Naples, Florida is another public school where they got Devin Moore. On the 2023 class, they got two private school kids. You have Keon Keeley from Berkeley Prep. And now you have Sedrick Irvin Jr. from Gulliver Prep. So they're being really smart and strategic with who they're going after in the state of Florida. And they're not just focusing in on the private school kids, which I think is smart. They're looking for the right kind of player and the right kind of person, but they're more open to the fact that, hey, sometimes these kids are going to come from different places. And I like that because I think that gives Notre Dame a chance to say, hey, look, let's really be open-minded about where these kids are. Let's go look for these kids. Let's find these kids. And let's get these kids. But the other thing is it does not hurt you when you're going to recruit the next kid from Florida that you've already got Keon Keeley and Cedric Irvin in the class. It's not going to hurt you with, obviously Jaylen Brown that this is going on. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get those guys, but it certainly helps. And when you look at the state of Florida, in the 2023 class, there are still several players from the state that I know that Notre Dame definitely wants to take a look at in this class. Obviously we mentioned Jaylen Brown. Carnell Tate's in the state of Florida now, even though he's an Illinois kid. He's at IMG Academy. You look at the offensive line. TJ Shanahan is a guy that Notre Dame is looking at from the state of Florida. He's a very good football player. He's a guy that Notre Dame likes. He transferred to Texas this year, but he's a guy that originally was from Florida. John Walker is a defensive tackle from Florida that Notre Dame is looking at. Derek LeBlanc is a player from Florida that has visited Notre Dame. He's a D tackle kind of kid. He's another guy that they're looking at. See here. A couple of these guys actually have left. I know that Malik Muhammad was at IMG for a minute. Samuel Mpemba is a guy that's playing at IMG now. He's a guy that is, I believe Tom Lloyd reported that he's going to be visiting for the Cincinnati game. And then, of course, you've got Cedric Baxter, who I talked about earlier, who's a running back that Notre Dame is looking at. So there's still a lot of guys on the board from the state of Florida that Notre Dame is pushing for and looking at. And I don't think it hurts that you've got these two kids in the class. So we've talked about kind of what's next at running back recruiting. We've talked about how this group has impacted how what he brings to the class, I should say. So as we kind of hopefully wait on Brian to get here, let's go through some of these questions. I haven't had a chance to go through questions with you guys in a while. So we'll work through some questions here, and then hopefully Brian will be able to join us this morning. But Bert Ferentz says, hey, guys, haven't commented in a while, working a ton of hours. Still don't miss rewatching a show, though. Just wanted to say great job as always and keep up the good work. Thank you for that. Matt Romero jumped in pretty quickly. Morning, IB Nation. Tim Sully, good morning at you. Great way to start the day with a commitment. No doubt about that. Coach Koch says, I'm all for big commitments, but I have to be honest, if the O-line coaching does not improve it won't matter if we have five 5-star O-line commits and a 7-star running back. It'd matter a little bit. I mean, look, there comes a point in time where you can have enough talent to overcome the coaching. I don't think Notre Dame necessarily has that kind of talent right now on the offensive line. And the guys that are that good are young. But, I mean, sometimes you can be talented enough to overcome that. I think that's true. But I get your point. But, today I'm going to focus on the positives a little bit. Jacob says, looking forward to this analysis. No clue we were even pushing for Irvin. Yeah, he's been a guy that they've liked for a while. Now, I know because he's not like a super sexy player and he doesn't have like just game-breaking speed. I think there's some people that he doesn't have, elite size. There's been some, maybe hope from some that Notre Dame didn't push for him, but Notre Dame's liked him for a while. They've liked him quite a bit. I like him. I think he's a good player. Is he an elite running back? No. Is he a really good running back? Yes. And this is the thing I like about what they're doing at running back recruiting. I think Chris Tyree was an elite back because of his speed, but I don't think Logan Diggs and Audric Estime were elite backs, although you all know I liked both of them a lot, especially Logan Diggs. Jadarian Price, I like a lot, not an elite back. Cedric Irvin, I like a lot, not an elite back. They're not bringing in like that, that elite player, but they're just stocking up now, good back after good back after good back. I think if you were to say, hey, if I'm going to be critical of Lance Taylor as a recruiter, it's been his inability to land the very top of the board guys, like Nicholas Singleton, Dallin Hayden. But you also have to admit that, while being maybe frustrated by that, you still have to look and say the overall talent that Notre Dame has landed at running back since he got here is significantly better than it was. You talk about Chris Tyree. We talked about how that recruitment went down. You follow that up with Logan Diggs and Audric Estime. You follow that up with Jadarian Price. You follow that up with Sedrick Irvin Jr. That's really good running back recruiting, in my opinion, for a place like Notre Dame. So there's always room for improvement, but I really like the job that Lance Taylor's doing. And getting a kid from the state of Florida certainly doesn't hurt. Here we go. John Klimek, good to have you, buddy. Richard Maltby says, pretty big commitment. Reminds me a lot of Travis Etienne watching film. When Travis, similar body type to when Travis was coming out of high school. I think Travis probably a little bit longer, but similar body type, really elusive, not a home run threat per se, but a really quick player. I could see the similarities there. I don't know if I'd say he was as explosive as Travis was coming out of high school, but very similar running style. Jacob says, tell me there's anything better than listening to IB all day while you work, when you exercise, or doing whatever chore around the house. I agree with you. I absolutely love it. Mark Stewart says, little bloodline from the U. Now, his dad played at Michigan State, but he is a Miami guy. And you know what? I've never actually thought to look at this, if whether or not he's related to, obviously Michael Irvin. It says, yeah, he's the cousin. So I just looked this up. So Cedric Irvin Jr.'s dad, Cedric Irvin, is the cousin of Michael Irvin. So yes, Mark, you are spot on. A little bit of bloodline from the U, and a guy that was a pretty good player. The dad, and of course the cousin, of course. Zachary Ryan is in the house. Andrew Freer is in the house. Andrew Goss, this is better than my morning coffee. Love it. New Tommy Gunn says new rule. New IB rule, no show before 10:30 Eastern. Sorry, buddy. Had to do it. Look, the news determines when we do our shows. Michael Johnson says we need to keep recruiting Florida, Georgia, Texas, California, and the East Coast. Agree with you completely. Liam Burke is fired up. He is in the chat. Let's go. I love it. Andrew Michael Johnson says Tommy's recruiting his butt off. He is, absolutely is. But I also think we need to give a shout out as well to Lance Taylor for this one. I think he also played a role, but Tommy Reese is doing a very good job. I think Dre Brown is having an early impact as well. I think it helps. It helps with that as well. Drunk Vigo, he can catch the ball. He certainly can. He says he got cat-like balance, bro. Yes, he does. I love his feet. There's no doubt. Michael Johnson said he runs a little bit like Kyron. I'm going to pull that up, Michael. I was having trouble getting that up. Jonathan Hill Kim also agrees with with Michael, he says, yep, he runs like a lankier Kyron. How funny is that a dude that's like 5'10 and a half is considered lankier than Kyron? He's short. There's no doubt about it. Get to some more of these comments and questions here. I appreciate you all being with me this early in the morning. We're good. We're good. TT says, do his skills make you think he can play early? You know, it's a little bit too soon for that, TT. I mean, he's still like a third of the way through his junior year of high school. A lot of that's going to be determined by how he develops over the next year and a half. I mean, he's got to fill out. I mean, not many kids can be 3 or 4 games into their junior season. You're like, yep, that guy's going to play early. Do I see some skills that make me think if he stays on the current track of development that he's on, that he could help out early? Yeah. And the thing I like about him is he brings a little bit of a different element than what the current backs have. You know, when you look at him, you probably say there's a chance that Chris Tyree may be gone by the time he gets here. If Chris Tyree is around, it's only going to be for 1 year. You say, okay, well, you've got Logan Diggs, Audric Estime. Those are bigger backs. He's a great compliment to them. Jadarian Price, he's similar to Jadarian Price, but again, they complement. Jadarian's a little bit stronger back, a little bit bigger back, brings a little bit more juice to the table, but they both can catch the ball. So like a Jadarian Price, Cedric Irvin combination could be similar to a Chris Tyree, Kyron Williams situation. Not that they're identical players, because they're not, meaning that they both do enough in the run game and the pass game to play well together, but they do it in different ways. So I think that he's a guy that complements the current skill set well. It's just going to determine, you know, how much does he develop as a blocker over the next year and a half? How much size does he fill out with? Do I think he's a guy that can maybe help out in his first 2 years? I think if he stays on this current trajectory, I would say so. But I do need to still see that. I do need to still see him be that kind of guy. Bruce Latimer joining the show. Great to see you in the show, Bruce. Great to hear from you. It's been a long time, buddy. Says Tony Jones Jr., my book, not fast, shifting the whole, surprising moves. Yeah, I'd say obviously doesn't have Tony's build. You know, Tony was over 200 pounds as a junior, but you know, it does show. See, Bruce, this is where I think a lot of people miss the boat at running back from a recruiting standpoint, is they look for they look for, you know, elite speed and all this other kind of stuff, and they miss the fact that this guy can play. I mean, look, Tony Jones Jr., I believe, I'm going to look this up, but I believe Tony Jones Jr. is a guy that already has more career carries than Dexter Williams does in the NFL. And people can talk about, you know, explosiveness and all this kind of stuff, but the reality is what you need to have is vision, balance, footwork, ability to make people miss. And we see it all the time. Running backs that don't have great speed. I mean, Clyde Edwards-Helaire ran a 4.6 at the pro day and the combine. That's not fast at all. And, you know, he's a guy that obviously was a great player in college and turned out to be a first-round back. So, you know, footwork, vision, all those kind of things, shifty, guy that can make people miss, all things that made Tony Jones Jr. a much better back than people ever gave him credit for, and are certainly things that Cedric Irvin Jr. brings to the table as well. Irishman 7114. This kid looks like he could be a monster in a passing screen game. I agree with you. And then Andrew Goss says, I think he's a good between the tackles guy. These comments were literally back to back. Yet Irishman 7114 saying this kid looks like he could be a monster in the passing screen game. And then Andrew Goss talks about how he could be good between the tackles. And I agree with both of you. And that's what I like about Cedric, is he does bring that all-around skill set to the table. I think he's a guy that can do a little bit of everything. He's not great at anything. He's just good at a lot of different things. Tommy Gunn says now they can find a big three and take whichever comes first. Andrew Goss says, any updates on Moore? I'm not sure which Moore you're referring to. If you're talking about Devin Moore, I'm really not worried about that. I said this on the board, and a buddy of mine called me a traitor. But if I was living in Orlando and Florida asked me to come to the game, and it was Florida versus Alabama, and I had any desire or love for college football, I flat out would have taken a visit. There's no question about it. So I am not I'm not concerned about that one at all. And then Jacob also, are we going to hold on to Keeley? His comments from his Florida trip scare me, but I really hope look. I'm not. Look, anything can happen in recruiting. I'm not worried about Keon Keeley. I'm not at all. I mean, compared to a lot of other things, I think these kids wanted to go see a game, and then you pay a level of respect to the team that brought you there. But I'm really not worried about it. All right, so let's see. All right, we got Brian Smith joining us this morning. Brian, you were out running some errands. I said, hey, man, you need to head home right now. We got to talk about Cedric Irvin Jr., and you did that. You did that for the Notre Dame fans. So Brian Smith obviously was with us at the very beginning of our Irish Breakdown launch. Brian is now running the Central Florida site for SI Fan Nation, and, of course, all over the recruiting trail. So, Brian, I want to talk a little bit about your thoughts on Cedric Irvin Jr., but I also want to talk about this trend we're seeing from Notre Dame in the last couple seasons of really getting back into the state of Florida. So let's start off a little bit, Brian. Just give us your overall thoughts of Cedric Irvin Jr. and what he brings to the Notre Dame, the future Notre Dame depth chart.
Ironically, he reminds me a little bit of a certain player that wears number 23 for the Irish right now in terms of where he was in high school. For the people that don't know, Kyron was a receiver part of his high school career. And it's one of the reasons that, Notre Dame can use him in a variety of ways. Well, Cedric is a player that is a very good athlete. I mean, forget football for a second. He's an athlete. He could be a track kid, a baseball kid, whatever he wanted. He could be that 2nd down and 5 guy that you bring in and throw a swing pass to just to keep the chains moving, run a draw, do whatever. He's very versatile. I need to see him as a power player, which shocks me about Kyron. Kyron is very good at breaking tackles and falling forward, as we've all seen. I don't know if Cedric can do that, but their body size, their skill set with their hands, etc., is very similar. The only question, again, can he play to that level where you're just taking a pounding? I actually kind of wish Kyron would take less, but that's another story for another day. The problem is he plays for a very good football team. They're 4A, I believe, in Miami. For those of you that don't know, Gulliver Prep is one of the most elite academic institutions anywhere in the United States. It's like $30,000 a year to go there. It's insane.
Yeah, we talked about this before the show, Brian. You don't go to Gulliver Prep to just play football.
No,
go there
they
because
won't let you in.
Right, exactly.
They don't care. Yeah, you want to get an education there. It's like Vanderbilt, Virginia, Notre Dame, UCLA, Wisconsin, certain schools. You play Division I football there, they will check on each and every one of your classes and what you're doing. Gulliver is a very similar thing. So the transition will not be a difficult one for Cedric. And further, it won't be a big transition in terms of playing because he plays in Miami. Just the 7-on-7 action and just the neighborhoods around, literally, backyard football there is different than anywhere else in the world. It's the best city for high school football anywhere. It's the only thing that matters in that city from the high school ranks beyond track. Track's very big in Florida. And he will adapt quickly. I don't know if he'll play right away at Notre Dame. They obviously have plenty of talent, but he fits a need as a 3rd down back, and he also fits a need as a guy that can be versatile, but play in the slot. He can play 2 backs in the backfield. He can be in the pistol. It won't matter. He's with a good coaching staff. It will help him just to stay there and just finish out his career at Gulliver, which I expect him to do, and he'll be fine moving on to Notre Dame.
No, I believe his dad is his head coach. Is Cedric the head coach at Gulliver Prep? I know he's on the – I know he coaches there. I don't know if he's the head coach or not, but he's obviously – his dad comes from a coaching background, and you can see that. He's not just a kid that had a dad that was athletic and he's athletic. This is a kid that is a very skilled player, a kid that obviously has been taught how to play the game. And I think that also is going to help with that transition to the next level too. It's going to just be about learning the playbook and getting stronger. It's not going to be about, okay, here's how to get in a stance. Here's how to take, you know what I mean? Which a lot of kids, a lot of kids have to kind of learn to a degree. This is a kid that's going to know how to play the game, and I think that helps too. And he's got a pretty good teammate down there at Gulliver Prep, Brian, that I know that Notre Dame would love to continue to get on as well.
Jalen Brown would be the player in question. There's only maybe 4 or 5 kids I've seen in the country with similar speed, regardless of class. Mm-hmm. And that's always a good start to the conversation. He's 6'1", 6'1 and a half, 180, 190 pounds, and he's the kind of kid that can catch it behind his head. You put all those together, you get 40 offers, and that's what it's been. So
yeah.
Jalen's been on campus, for those of you that don't know, and he is very interested. His dad's fascinated with Notre Dame and likes Rocket Ismail. It's a good fit. So I talk to his dad once in a while. I haven't had a chance to talk to Jalen himself, but his dad's a good dude. And they don't care if they leave Florida. It's the rarest of the rare for Notre Dame.
A Miami kid that just doesn't care about staying in the state yet.
Yeah, it's the area's changed some, but part of that's because University of Miami's football program is a travesty. But no, it's a joke.
They got curb stomped by Michigan State at home. That is so bad. That is I
called that game. That was the worst line from Vegas that I've seen in years. Miami was favored by 6.5, I believe, 6.
Yeah.
And I said they're going to lose, and it's going to be double digits. They're terrible. Their offensive line's probably worse than Notre Dame's.
That's saying a lot. That's saying a lot.
Miami
close. And Clemson both are close to Notre Dame right now in bad offensive lines. Brian, I want to talk to you about something else too. You and I have known each other long time, 20 years. And we've had a lot of conversations about Notre Dame recruiting the state of Florida.
Yes, we have.
And the need for Notre Dame to recruit the state of Florida. And then, of course, the success or lack thereof at times for Notre Dame to recruit the state of Florida. Notre Dame went through a stretch early on in Brian Kelly's tenure where I don't think Brian Kelly understood that there's a certain type of kid you just can't bring to Notre Dame and have success. They went in the opposite direction for a few years where they just said, forget it, we're not recruiting Florida anymore. They're back to it. What do you think right now of the current strategy with obviously Mike Elston running the show as a recruiting with Marcus Freeman, with Mike Mickens? Obviously, the last couple of years, you're starting to see Notre Dame have more and more success in the state of Florida. What do you think about their strategy? Is it right? Is it enough? Is more needed? Talk to me about what you think about, because this is now 2 of your 5 commitments in 2023 are from the state of Florida. You got to commit. You got a DB in the 2022 class in Devin Moore. You got a DB in the 2021 class from Florida in Philip Riley, who's, technically not from Florida like long term, but he did play high school football in Florida for 2 years. Talk to me about what your thoughts are, Brian. Are you starting? Because I know you got to recruit state. Are you feeling a lot better or not about the work Notre Dame is putting in that state now?
I like the direction that it's gone. As you mentioned, Notre Dame is not a place where anybody's just going to survive. The social aspect of it, it's farther from home, the weather, the whole 9 yards. And of course, academically, can a young man not only finish, but is he going to do something with it? All of those together, a lot of the Florida kids and a lot of kids from around the country in general don't make it at Notre Dame. You got to be more selective. Unfortunately, that means one thing: more research, and a lot more of it. And that means more spending of money. But it's not like Mike Elston's having that money come out of his pocket. It's Notre Dame's anyway. They got a $30 billion endowment. Well, they can figure it out. That's how I look at it. They've done a good job picking around the state. I remember when I went to see Moore about a year or so ago, I told you, I said, this kid is a Notre Dame fit. I hope they really go after him. And they'd started to recruit him already, but he's an example. They're just going to be one here, one there. You're not going to go into, let's say, like Alabama could care less. They absolutely could care less. They'll come in and offer 4 or 5 kids from a program, Deerfield Beach or whatever it is. Some of those kids could make it at Notre Dame and some wouldn't. State school, it's different. You can hide kids. You can't do that at Notre Dame. Notre Dame has done a really good job over the last 2 classes of finding young men that not only fit Notre Dame, but could flourish at Notre Dame, and they can also run really fast.
That's the key. That right there is the key, because if you're going out of Florida and you're not getting top athletes, then what's the point?
This state is ridiculous with skill.
Yeah. And the thing that I like too, Brian, is not all these kids are private school kids. Obviously, the 2023 kids are. Obviously, you got Keon Keeley, who goes to Berkeley Prep is also a very good academic institution.
Ridiculous.
And obviously Gulliver Prep. But, you've got Devin Moore. I believe Naples, that's a public school, right? You have Joe Wilkins Jr. came from a public school. Philip Riley was at a public school. So it's not just that they're just kind of taking I think sometimes the lazy route can be just, hey, we're just going to get kids from Gulliver and Berkeley Prep, because those kids can handle it. They're finding right kids, whether it's public. I mean, if I'd have told you 6 years ago that Notre Dame was going to get a kid from North Fort Myers, you'd have been like, no, that kid's not going to thrive at Notre Dame. And you definitely wouldn't have thought he would have the successful career that Joe Wilkins has had away from the football field. you're like, that's a kid you're gonna have to hold his hand to go to. I mean, that's just the history. So they're finding those kids. They overlook the fact that this isn't your traditional Notre Dame school, right? Naples is a little different. Naples is a little nicer area. I like the fact that they're doing that. They're finding those right kind of kids. But like you said, it's been skill players. It's not like they're getting guards and D tackles. They're getting skill players from the state of Florida. That's important.
Notre Dame, out of the kids that you mentioned, the only one that's from a high school that just from the name right off the bat that I'd be concerned with would be Wilkins. Mm-hmm. North Fort Myers, it's where the Freak's from. Mm-hmm. It's where Deion Sanders is from. It's a very tough area. Most of those kids are not going to fit in at Notre Dame. That's the beginning and end of conversation. It's just what it is. You can like that or dislike it. It's still true. I went and scouted Joe. I remember after he committed, I mean, it was a rainstorm game, but he was the kid they depended on. He played free safety, moved around. I could tell he was their guy. Mm-hmm. And they always have multiple D1 kids at North Fort Myers High. So when I found out about his GPA, I'm like, well, this is the perfect fit. If I could find one or two of those kids a year to tell you, hey, you need to tell Notre Dame to recruit these, that's great. That's the objective. Mm-hmm. They're more the exception than the rule, though. You're probably going to still end up with more Keeleys. Mm-hmm. And I know Keelan pretty well. I live in Tampa, and so does he. I live pretty close to him. That kid, he could play for any school in the country. He has NFL potential. He just happens to go to Berkeley. Notre Dame lucked out. Mm-hmm. That's another exception, but you still got to get the public school kids who have the chip on their shoulder that their one and only objective is to go to the NFL. I know Notre Dame fans don't want to hear that. A lot of them, alums, too bad. If you're going to win big, you got to have them. You just got to find ones that can actually graduate too. And that's that difficult middle ground. Joe Wilkins is, I don't know if he's going to play in the NFL or not. I doubt it, but he's a good football player. Notre Dame's lucky to have him. And he also opens up the gate for future Greater Fort Myers area.
Because it shows you can go to Notre Dame and thrive in the classroom.
He's a kid that's going to be respected when he goes back to Fort Myers.
Yes.
The kids in that area, it's not a huge city. The kids in that area are going to know who he is. They're going to ask him, what did you think of Brian Kelly? What did you think of your entire experience? Does the education matter? Can a black guy make it there? That question will be the first question that's going to get asked. I guarantee from a Florida kid, can a black kid make it there? Flat out, that'll be the first question.
Because that's something that they're being told by other coaches that you can't. That's the reason that conversation is important, is because a lot of these kids get told that by other schools. If you don't think that's happening from a negative recruiting standpoint, you're burying your head in the sand.
That is,
kids get told that all the time. Nah, kids like you can't make it in Notre Dame, which pisses me off, but that's a different conversation for a different day. So big commitment for Notre Dame, Brian. How do you think the commitment of Keon Keeley and now Cedric Irvin Jr. in 2023 is going to impact? Because there's about 7 or 8 other kids from Florida they're recruiting right now, and a lot of them are top guys. I mean, top level guys. Whether it's Cardinal Tate, who's again, he's at IMG. He's not a longtime Florida kid, but it doesn't look, when Cardinal's down in Florida, you kind of immediately adopt that I'm in Florida mentality. You know this, Brian. I know this. Notre Dame has now got 2 kids. You look at Cedric Baxter from Orlando. There's some kids down there, Samuel and Pemba, who's at IMG as well. Do you think these 2 commitments are something that could potentially play a role, not the deciding factor, but play a role in Notre Dame trying to get some of these other kids that are on the board?
Yes. Just like with the combination of a kid being from an area and coming back home and talking about a school, it could be Minnesota, Notre Dame, USC, or whatever, the kids are going to listen. Florida kids tend to talk to other Florida kids. When I go to a game, I'll talk to a guy on the sideline. I'll say, hey, what do you think about the opponent tonight? And so. They're almost always on a first name basis, even if it's 100 miles apart. Because of social media, there is no more distance. And they all associate with the state of Florida. There's a few exceptions, but outside of the Panhandle kids, which they're a little more secluded, if you're in Central or South Florida, they all know each other because they play 7-on-7. They compete in basketball and they compete in track and different things. They run across each other. So they're going to know. It matters. Talking about the kids that they're recruiting, unless something changes, I'm waiting to hear back. I'm going to go over to Kissimmee later today to see LeBlanc and Walker, the 2 defensive linemen that Notre Dame's recruiting. Both of them are national recruits. And again, it's a public school, but it's a program that's pretty good at Kissimmee, and both of them can make it at Notre Dame, no problem. If you add just as an example, nobody knows probably who I'm talking about. John Walker's the D tackle there. He's 285, and he will run through you like a pencil. I mean, it's just he can snap you, no problem. But he's a really nice kid. You can't teach those physical skills. For whatever the reason, there are a heck of a lot more guys like that down here where I live than up north where you live. Notre Dame has to recruit those guys. And if you don't steal some of them away from Florida, Alabama, Clemson, etc., you will never beat them in the playoff. It's that simple. That's the one thing that I don't like about Notre Dame's defense right now. They don't have a just take you and move you guy as a one tech or whatever. John could play 3 tech or 1 tech physically right now at Notre Dame, and he's only a junior in high school. He is very, very talented. But again, you got to get one of those guys, or not have to be a D tackle, one of those public school guys every year that he's going to maim the other team. I mean, just physically has nothing to do with coaching. He's just better than the other guy. And that's what they have. Derek plays defensive end, so you can't double team both of them. They're both national recruits, and Notre Dame's after both. If you get these 2 guys you just mentioned, Keeley and Irvin, now they're like, oh, I can see it. It's going to make it more
because they're big name kids. That's the thing is they're not just some 3-star kid. Like, I don't know who that is. I mean, Keon Keeley's a big name recruit from a big time high school. Sedrick Irvin Jr. is the same thing. Before we let you go, Brian, I just wanted to ask you quickly, have you had a chance at all this year, this fall, to see Keon or Devin Moore play yet? Have you had a chance to see the one yet?
I haven't went to see them play live. I've just seen practice. I went to see Keon in practice. I don't need to see Keon live. I'll go to one of his games later. He's an NFL player, barring injury.
I don't think people realize just how freaky Keon is as a prospect. I mean, his combination of, I mean, he's got basketball length, basketball player length.
He plays hoops too, by the way. I already told him I'm looking forward to seeing you play basketball.
Yes.
More than I am football, because in basketball, I mean, I'm from Indiana, so basketball is in my blood, but you cannot hide on a basketball court.
Right.
If your feet aren't sound, you will get dunked on.
That's the thing that makes him special to me. 6'6", 230, great frame, but his feet and his explosiveness have taken such a jump since his sophomore year. And I thought he was a top 100 player as a sophomore. What I've seen from him, from what you sent me from his spring game, because you were at his spring game, what you sent me from his spring game and what I've seen so far from him as a junior, he is going to be an elite prospect. I've also liked what I've seen so far from Devin Moore. Devin looks like he's got a step. He's added a step of speed, in my opinion, from what he was as a junior, which is impressive, again, because we both liked him quite a bit as a junior. So
his dad is his trainer, by the way. That's
okay. I didn't know that. It's interesting.
His dad trains a bunch of the kids in the area. So they do ladder drills and stuff every day. He's all over it.
Well, he's had a really good start to the season so far for me. So I like the fact that we're talking about all these kids from Florida that Notre Dame is going after.
Me too.
Brian, I know you too, a Notre Dame guy stuck down there. I absolutely know that. So Brian, thank you so much for joining us, buddy. I appreciate you making some time. So that's Brian Smith joining us today. Brian obviously loves it and this is, I've known Brian since he lived in Indiana, and he has always been about wanting to get more kids from Florida, and I completely understand why. Before we move on to some more questions, I did want to pull this up. I just came across this comment while Brian was talking. Garth Cassidy says, "Happy for the commit. Tragic news from my family. My stepfather passed away." Hey, Garth, I'm truly sorry to hear that, buddy. We'll be praying for you. I already see down here from some of the comments that a lot of Notre Dame fans are already kind of reaching out to you and praying for you. But yeah, we'll be praying for you. I'm really sorry to hear that. You've got my email. Let me know if there's anything you need. Okay, so we'll be praying for you. I'm really sorry to hear that. And then some more comments before we take off. TT, thanks for the good answer, Coach. Love you and Vince. Listen all the time. Keep up the great work. We will do our best. Griffin Miller says, what rank is Notre Dame? Griffin, I don't know what question you're asking. If you're talking about recruiting or if you're talking about the current team is ranked 12th in the AP, 10th in the coaches poll. Current recruiting-wise, the 2022 class is ranked number 2 by 247 Sports and number 1 by Rivals. And the 2023 class, which Cedric Irvin is now a part of, is ranked number 2 by Rivals and 247 Sports. So not sure which one you're looking for, but we just answered both of them. Matt Romero says the current 2023 commits are actively recruiting other top players to come play with them at Notre Dame. I'm also not worried about them flipping. I tend to agree with that. We'll get to a few more of these before we head out of here. Jacob Steele says, I love the versatility we're targeting and building in our backfield. Brian, if I recall, didn't he recruit guys who could play just any other position? So hold on. If I recall, didn't he recruit guys who could play just about any position along the other pieces have changed under Quinn? I think you're talking about Stan. It's not the guys can't play other positions. It's just that I don't think they're focusing on. It's like they just kind of lock guys into a position where Harry Hiestand was much more of a just get the best guys and get length, get athleticism, and get power, and then you figure out a way to get the best five on the field. I don't think they're doing that as much now. But that's also because Harry Hiestand was a better coach. Garen Knutson says, couldn't be happier with that these kids are prioritizing education. Of course, I won a national championship, but I want these kids to be successful post-football. Best way to rep Notre Dame is to succeed. No question. And this is the thing I've always said. There are a lot more kids like this than people admit. And that's what I've always been frustrated by. It is this, in my opinion, a false narrative that a lot of these kids don't want to be successful off the field. And I've never found that to be true. There's always kids like that, but I've never found that to be true. It's just, is Notre Dame giving them a reason to pick Notre Dame? Justin MacArthur says, if Notre Dame is going to recruit at the elite level, we all want them to, then we need to get used to these recruits visiting, talking to other schools and recruiting games. Yes, absolutely right. Absolutely right. People are not going to stop recruiting Keon Keeley. They're not ever. When he is at Notre Dame, they're going to still try to recruit him. That's just a fact. Bruce Latimer says, number one, Smitty still has an amazing Ray-Ban game. Number two, good to see you both are still working together. And because Bruce has known us for a long time too. Three, you two are stealing money, doing what you both are made for and getting paid for it. Blessings. Appreciate you, Bruce. Appreciate you very much. And thanks for joining the chat this morning. I know you got a lot on your plate as I know all of you do, and I appreciate all y'all being with us today. Tim Hatch says that he looks super, super shifty on film. Hope he does well. Jojo Pineda says, good morning, IB Nation. Love the commitment of Irving. Go Irish. Love the show. I'm by the dentist's office getting stuff done. Ooh, I'm sorry to hear that. That does not sound fun. Kenny Moore is joining the show this morning. All right. Tommy Guns. Hey, Brian, thanks for jumping on with us since Vince is busy with that other thing he does. You are welcome. All right. Got some trolls in here, so get those guys out of here. All right, get down here to some more questions. TT, Brian, thanks for bringing on Brian. He brings really good analysis. I love hearing you guys talk shop. I appreciate that very, very much. Notre Dame 2164. So glad 2023 recruiting is going well. So, hey, Notre Dame 2164, I don't have an email or a DM or anything like that for you. So I just wanted to reach out to you and make sure that you're doing okay. Glad to see you in the chat today. I know I didn't see it till after the show the other day that you had said you were sick and stuck at home. So I'm glad that you're obviously able to listen to the shows, but just wanted to reach out to you and hope that you're doing well. Garen Knutson, love the show. Thanks for your input, Brian. Talking to Brian Smith. Keon, he goes, Keeley is a freak. Kenny, he really is. He is a special, special kid. I don't think some do. You do. I think a lot of people in this forum do. People that listen to us do, but I don't think a lot of Notre Dame fans really appreciate just how unique Keon Keeley is as a prospect. He's special. He's a freaky athlete, talented kid, high academics, character kid. He's unique. He's a bit of a unicorn, in my opinion. Irishman 7114, thanks to Brian for coming on the show. Great analysis and insight. Wish you the best. Thank you for those. I'll pass those along to Brian. Kenny Moore loves it when Brian comes on. I agree. Hey, so it was funny, Kenny. So I called Brian right before the show. The reason I was a little bit late is because we got the show started around 9:35 because I was talking to Brian trying to get him see what was going on with him, but he was actually driving around running some errands at home. He had finished up some work for the website he runs. I said, "Hey man, can you turn around and head home because I want to get you on the show." So he was obviously obliged and was able to get on with us. So I appreciated that very, very much. Lot of prayers and offering them up for Garth. I love this community, and hopefully, Garth, we can be there for you as best we possibly can. But let me know if there's anything that you need. Terry Blair says this kid looks good, doesn't have game-breaking speed, but he has decent speed and good vision. He hits the hole hard and has good feet to make cuts. Go Irish. Very good analysis, Terry. I agree with you. Very much. I think that's good observations on him. David Knight says number 3 and 247. I think that they're number 2 now that they have Irvin. Larry says, great show, Brian. Thank you. Chief Brody asks, is he a gap closer? Not right now. He's not, but from this, so he would, if he's going to fit in the gap closer role, he'd fit in that second category in that he doesn't necessarily make like that big leap forward, but your backfield is better because he's in it. So in that regards, he is in the broadest sense of the term, but he's not that kind of kid. Like Rivals ranks him 81st. I don't see that just yet. I think he's got a chance to end up being a top 100 player, but I don't have him there just yet. I have him more in like the 150, 200 range, which is a really good player. But is it okay? You're beating Bama because you have him? No, not really. You can beat Bama with him, but not because of him. But you give me a really good O-line and a really well-coached O-line, I think I think he could do some really unique things. David Knight says, so do they stop with this young man or go for another back in this class? I think it depends on if they can get a second back in the 2022 class, David. I think if they can get a second back in 2022, I think they would probably stop with Sedrick, depending on how the rest of the roster shakes out. But I would like to see them not take a second 2022 back and focus on a second 2023 back is what I would like to see Notre Dame do. I'd like to see them do that. Eddie Walsh says, hey, Coach, first-time commenter, long-time listener, just wanted to know if you ever did a podcast on the Cooper Flanagan commitment. If not, what are your thoughts? Sorry if this has been asked, answered. It has not been asked or answered, and I did not end up doing a show on Cooper Flanagan. We were really slammed those couple days, and I just wasn't able to get that done. But I like Cooper Flanagan a lot. I definitely like Cooper Flanagan if you're bringing in 2 tight ends in that class. Here's some things I like about Cooper. Number one, he's big. He's a big physical kid. He has the chance to be a really special blocker, but he's not just a big, stiff kid. To me, he's a much better prospect than Mac Markway. And the reason is because even though he's big and physical like Mac Markway was, I think Cooper's taller and longer, but I think Cooper's got a really nice pass game repertoire. He is a traditional tight end. He is a guy that can do seams, crossers, options. He can do a lot of the things that Michael Mayer does. He's not the athlete that Michael Mayer is, but as far as when I mean a lot of things Michael Mayer can do, I'm talking about the way in which Notre Dame uses Michael Mayer right now are things that I think Cooper can thrive at. Very good pickup, and he's going to continue to get better. He's going to get bigger. He does, like, he's a big kid. He's like 6'5", 240, but Eddie, he's not 6'5", 240 and like in the Michael Mayer sense, because when Michael Mayer was a junior, he was like cut and he was like kind of like looked like a grown-up already. Cooper still has a lot of body reshaping that can be done, and he comes from a great program. So I graded him out as like a top 150 to 200 caliber player. That's a good football player as a junior. It was a good pickup, and now that you've got him in the class, you can focus on, getting one of the studs. And look, if they were somehow able to get Deuce Robinson to go with Cooper Flanagan, That would be arguably as good of a tight end class as Notre Dame has landed under Brian Kelly, and that's saying a lot. Jojo Pineda says, hi, Brian. Who would you like to pair Irving with in the 2023 class if they want another back? Thanks. I honestly am fine with, any of the backs that they're on. If it's Cedric Baxter, if it's Justin Haynes, I think it's not like he's a scat back. So Cedric's not a scat back. So if you still wanted to get a scat back, you could. I wouldn't. I think he fits with Jade Lamar. They're very similar body types, very similar skill sets. I think he fits with Justin Haynes just fine. Again, because there's a lot more crossover with those two players than there is with Cedric Baxter, for example. But I think that they are they also have enough uniqueness that they can play together, in my opinion. And then Jojo asks, is Keeley like Cyrus Moss with athleticism? No. Cyrus Moss is sort of like a linebacker body that's got to grow into a defensive end. Keon's already bigger than Cyrus Moss. He's already about 2 inches taller, and he's already about 15, 20 pounds bigger. He's every bit as athletic, but more powerful than Cyrus Moss. I think Keon Keeley as a junior, as a sophomore, was as a better prospect than Cyrus Moss was. That's how good I think Keon Keeley is. Izzy taught me. I think Keon will be a top 40 to 50 caliber edge by signing day. I think when you say edge, you're talking about just overall player, right? Because he's already like top 50 edge player. I think you're talking about overall player. And if you are, and I think you are, I completely agree with you. Anthony Solomon says, Brian, was Cedric's dad a good NFL back? No, he only played about a year and a half in the NFL. He had some injuries that cut his career short, but he was a really good back in Michigan State. Played 3 years in Michigan State and went over 1,000 yards each year. He was a really good back, tough back, a real physical back. I think he only averaged over 5 yards a carry once in his 3 years. Really physical back. Anthony Solomon said he excited even more for Keeley after this podcast. Troy McIntosh, this is a good one. How would you compare Irvin to Judkins? Is Judkins quicker? I think I'm going to compare what little I've seen of Cedric is more advanced as a sophomore. Junior film was very similar. I think Quinshawn has better size. I think Quinshawn is a little stronger. I think Keon has a little bit more burst. I think their quickness, Troy, for me is the same. I'd like to hear your opinion if you disagree, but I think they have very similar foot quickness, very similar vision, very similar second-level anticipation, which is good for both of them. I think Quinshawn has the bigger body, and I think Cedric has a little bit more burst. That's how I'd compare the two. But I like the fact that you're looking at those two because I do think their overall skill set is similar, in my opinion. We got a Michigan State fan jumping in. Spunky181 says, congrats from a Spartan on getting Irvin Jr. Sad we couldn't get a legacy recruit, but congrats. Thank you for that very much. John Climax says, I think I like Keeley more. Appears to use his tools more in regards to speed, long arms, tilt. I would take either for sure. And that was comparing him, obviously, to Cyrus Moss. So I want to write down 2164's email address real quick. I want to reach out to you, check on you, see how you're doing. Tim Hatch says, is Keon Keeley a unicorn similar like Jadeveon Clowney? Not yet, Tim. Not yet, but I think he can get close. I think Keon has 5-star tools. I do. I think Keon is a special player. Jadeveon was thicker and more powerful at the same age. He was more so like Keon still is young. I mean, he has a young body. You just look at his face, he's got a baby face. His future, there's a lot of room for improvement with Keon, and that's what makes him scary. Jadeveon was kind of grown. Like he had that grown man look even as a junior in high school. He's just one of those guys that just physically matured a lot faster than most people. Keon's a little different. Keon still has he's got a little bit of a baby face, and he's still got a very young body. So I think they're a little different in that regards. Michael Moore says, "Hey, Brian, have not been able to chat. What other backs is Notre Dame recruiting in 2023?" So we went over some of that list earlier. Justice Haynes is a running back from Georgia that Notre Dame is recruiting. It's going to be a tough pull. He likes Notre Dame a lot, but there's a lot of big schools after him. Notre Dame offered Marquise Williams from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, somewhat recently. I think he's from Bishop McDevitt. Jaden Lamar is a running back from Washington that Notre Dame has offered. I believe this summer they offered him. Reuben Owens is a guy that they were after. Trayon Webb, never really got much traction with him. He ended up committing to Oklahoma. Another back that they're looking at is also Cedric Baxter, who is from Orlando, bigger back, 6'1", 215, really good size player, really talented player, likes Notre Dame a lot. And then did I say he was originally committed to Florida State? He was. And then also Caden Fegan is a guy that I'm told they're looking at as a running back for now, but he's a guy that's 6'3", 220, 225, fast, could play linebacker, maybe grow into a Viper, but also a running back. So, so I think he's a guy that it has. I think right now you have to put him on the running back board for now, but I think that there's some and the reason that matters is because a guy like Fegan, yes, you have to put him on the running back board now, but if you get a second back, or let's say you're not going to take a second back in this class, just for argument's sake, either one of those two scenarios happens, you don't have to stop recruiting him. And I think that's a very important piece to this. You don't have to stop recruiting him. And so for me, I look at this and I say this is a kid that can have a lot of success at multiple positions, and that's the thing that I like. So David Knight said, Brian, just look, Cedric is included, and they are number 3, but 2-3 spots is splitting frog hairs. Either is fantastic. Oklahoma's 3 5-stars and 2 4-stars. I'm looking at it now, David, and while Cedric is counted on the commit list, when I look at 247, and again, maybe it's just not refreshed on my page, but here, I'll pull it up here real quick. See if you're seeing the same thing. So this is what I'm seeing, David. I'm saying Notre Dame 3rd, but it says 4 commits. They have 5 commits. So even though Keon is listed as a commit, he's not. To me, he's not listed. He's not listed on the rankings, at least from what I can see. So that's and then if you look at the score, you've got Notre Dame is only 0.27 behind. You add Keon Keeley to that, and they shoot past Georgia. So that's kind of where I was coming from on that one. So I could be wrong, but that's why I said that they're going to end up being 2. Nolan Esparza says Keon Keeley always gives me Jalen Smith vibes, not position-wise, but just a freak athlete that has a special love for Notre Dame, even though he didn't grow up so close to Notre Dame like Jalen. I can see that, Nolan. Ronald Tuck says Vernon and Keeley are going to be a problem. I agree. AJ Miller says Keeley looks like Foskey, in my opinion. Agree. He was a more explosive version of Foskey at the same age. No question about it. All right. John Climax says, I love that we are talking about Keon and not really mentioning Vernon. Those two are going to be really good together. I agree. And the reason that we're obviously focusing on Keon in this particular podcast more than Brennan is because we're talking about Florida. But the fact that you've got Keon and Brendan Vernon together is great. I think Brendan's going to be a really good power end, really big end kid. Keon's going to be that freaky edge rusher. Really good combination. The Florida State scout, this is Brian Smith. He says Cedric Baxter Notre Dame was after him hard. I know Baxter well, and he's a good academic fit as well. Andrew Bacon says, when's Drake Bowen supposed to commit? I don't believe he's going to be committing anytime soon. I think I was under the impression it was going to be after the season. Notre Dame's got some work to do there, and I don't think they're in as good a place as people think, and I don't think it's anything that Notre Dame can do about it. They can still get him, no question. but I think he likes the Southern schools a lot more than people think. I don't view him as the traditional 2020 or local kid, in my opinion. Adam Blair says, "Hey Brian, out of all the recruits from the 2020, 21, and 22 classes, who are the prospects, if their potential is you think will be the best?" So 2020, so that goes back to the Michael Mayer, Chris Tyree class. I think the guys for me in that class that stood out the most as far as just like the highest ceilings, obviously Mayer and Chris Tyree are obvious. I think a couple others, Tosh Baker. If Tosh Baker gets coached in college, I think Tosh Baker has top 10 NFL draft pick talent. We've even seen flashes of it, and despite all of his struggles, I mean, when he's right, he's really good. He is a guy for me in that class that I view as that guy that has a chance to be really, really special. 2021 class, obviously Blake Fisher, Tyler Buckner, Lorenzo Stiles, a guy that Deion Colsey has about as high a ceiling as anybody in that class. Gilbert Rubio, Prince Collie, a couple guys that I don't think get as much love that I think have very high ceilings is Logan Diggs. And, to me, I think Joe Alt's a guy that we talked about as having a very high ceiling. But I think Ryan Barnes is a guy, and I continue to say is a guy that I think has a very high ceiling and a lot of potential in that class. So 2022, I mean, it's all the 5-star guys, right? It's Tobias Merriweather is my number one guy. CJ Williams. It's defensively. It's looking at Tyson Ford, Aiden Gabera. Pick a linebacker, all of them. And then in the secondary, Devin Moore and Benjamin Morrison have really, really high ceilings. I don't think Jaden Mickey has as high of a ceiling as those other guys just from a size standpoint, but he probably has as high of a floor of anybody in the class. I love Jaden Mickey. Really, really good player. And then we're going to end here. Actually, Coach Jackson says, Notre Dame is recruiting my son. They have been a school of interest for him. I would be curious, Coach Jackson, who your son is. I'd be curious about that. And congrats that he's being recruited by such a big time program. Shannon Heiduck says, "Hey Brian, sorry you couldn't be on the Bill King show." Me too. However, could you expound on my question about Notre Dame winning a low scoring game versus Wisconsin this weekend? Great show, thanks. So I'll just briefly, but we'll dive into this more as we get through the week. But certainly think Notre Dame's capable of a low scoring game. I think if anything, a low scoring game fits into Notre Dame's hands because Notre Dame is the more of the big play team. Anytime it's a low-scoring game, the team that's got a chance to score from 50 on any snap is the team that I think has a chance to win that at the end of the day. And I think if it's low-scoring, it means the Notre Dame defense is doing its job. And I think eventually Notre Dame's going to have enough speed on the perimeter that if it is a low-scoring game, they're going to be able to hit that big play or two that allows them to win the game. Last two questions is Craig Sebring says, "Are we getting Cardinal Tate?" I don't know, Craig. I've been confident in Notre Dame for a while, less so recently based on intel I hear from some people down in Florida, but I don't know. Just I've always kind of had this feeling in the back of my mind that I just feel like he's, when it's all said and done, going to pick Notre Dame. But he's a hard kid to get a read on. I think him pushing back his commitment date was really interesting. Very interesting. I don't know what that means, but very interesting. And then lastly, Chief Brody says, "Is there a show later today as well?" Yes, there will be a show today at 12:30. We will be talking about Notre Dame, Wisconsin. We're going to stack up the Notre Dame defense against the Wisconsin offense. We'll look at recruiting. We'll look at run game comparison, pass game comparison, and overall scoring comparison. And then talk about who has the advantages there. So we will have that today. So we will have it today at 12:30. And of course, we'll be back on our normal schedule. And then David Knight says, "Wouldn't things get interesting if Dante came to Notre Dame?" I'm going to tell you, I'll make a prediction right now. I'm going to make this prediction. If Dante Moore picks Notre Dame before the end of next year, before we get to the end of the next summer, if he picks Notre Dame between like now and like, let's say next May, Notre Dame will finish with the number one class in the country. That's my prediction. Because number one, he's a 5-star kid in my view. Number two, if you get Dante Moore, I think the dominoes start to fall. I think he can be that Pied Piper in the class that like Tyler Buckner was a great player. I think they're very similar prospects. I actually think Tyler has the higher ceiling just because he's such a dynamic athlete. Dante's more of a developed passer than Dante was. Than Tyler was. But Tyler was never like a real super outgoing guy on the recruiting trail. I think Dante would be more so. And that's why I think Dante would have an even greater impact from a recruiting standpoint than Tyler did. And so I think with the way that they're recruiting on defense, but here's the thing, like if you look at Tyler's class, even though he wasn't necessarily considered he wasn't a guy that was a vocal recruiter, that class still had some great players. I mean, you had good backs, you had really, really good receiving class, really good tight end class, good offensive line class. And I don't think he was necessarily an overly active recruiter. I think Dante will be more so and will help really finish that class off. So that's my prediction. If they get Dante Moore, Notre Dame will finish with the number one class. Not because they got Dante specifically, but because of what getting Dante Moore would mean for the rest of that class. Matt Romero says there was another 5-star quarterback from California that was on campus for Purdue. Yeah, that's Nico. I do not know how to pronounce Nico's last name. We talked about him this summer when we did our quarterback breakdown. We watched some film. So if you haven't seen that, I would encourage you to go back and watch that video. I'm actually going to see if I can pull it up here real quick, and I'm going to put a link into the description. But we talked about Nico this summer. I love this kid. I think he's a very talented quarterback. I don't know if Notre Dame is going to be able to get him, but I do love the fact that they were able to get him on campus this summer. I think it means they've got a shot. I think USC will be. I thought USC was going to be the team to beat. I'm actually going to put that link in there now, so you can check if you're in the chat, you can see the description bar below. We did a breakdown of Nico in the video the link that I just put in. Big, tall kid, big arm, still needs a lot of refinement, but athletic kid, not a runner, but can run. A lot like Dante, he can sit in the pocket. He's got a very strong arm. I don't think he's quite as precise of a passer as Dante, but very similar prospect, top 50-ish caliber player. Certainly a kid that I view as would be a very talented player. Dante's still my number one, though. Dante is my number one quarterback in this class, and that's not going to change because I think there's only one other quarterback that I think is on Dante's level, and that's the kid going to Oklahoma. And I think I think he's better than Arch Manning, and I think Arch is a very good player. I think he's better than Nico. I think Nico is a very, very good player. We've said this before. This is a great quarterback class. A great quarterback class. Notre Dame has to get one of the top ones. If they don't get Dante and they get Nico, I'm happy. But Dante is still my number one guy. But they're both very, very talented players. Nico is a really good football player. I feel like he's going to stay out west. But I love the fact that Notre Dame was able to convince him to come visit. Because here's the thing, he's a junior, so he came on his own dime. This wasn't an official visit. He's an underclassman. So it certainly says a lot about his interest in Notre Dame. It's certainly big. Mike asks, I'm going to answer this. This is more of a team question. Answer this and we'll get out of here. Off topic by the season's end. What are the chances of the O-line being Blake Fisher, Zeke Alton? Okay, Tosh Baker, Fisher, Zeke, Alt, and Patterson. I don't see that happening. I mean, if there's some injuries, certainly could see that if there's some injuries. But right now, I don't see that being the case because I wouldn't mind it, but that would mean that there's probably some injuries that have happened because Josh Lugg will be in the starting lineup barring injury, in my opinion. So, all right, so that is going to do it for today's show. I appreciate we had great numbers in the chat or in the stream today, more than I thought we would have for such an early last second thing we thrown together. Thanks to everybody who asked questions. Hey Garth, just a reminder, buddy. Reach out if you need anything. We're praying for you. Your IB family is definitely here for you. Absolutely. And everybody else who's out there, if you're not feeling well or going through some things, just, don't ever hesitate to reach out. I want to thank everybody for being with us today. We'll be back at 12:30 Eastern today to talk about Notre Dame, Wisconsin. So we're going to get back to that breakdown, get back on our regularly scheduled podcast channel. But thanks for being with us today for this special edition. Thanks to Brian Smith for being with us. Vince and I will be back at 12:30. Have a great rest of your day, and we will talk to you again very, very soon.